The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. Carl Sagan.
Welcome to the Lessons from Nature podcast, modeling the secrets of the bees. Hosted by Mark Rubin.
If you hear my voice, you're alive. And my voice is powered by energy from the sun. And you and everyone you ever met and everyone who ever lived is powered by sunlight. The energy from a star powers life on Earth. And I'd like to introduce my co-host, Chris Sparrow. Chris studied astrophysics, and this led him to studying the planetary weather systems of all the weather on planet Earth. He's currently analyzing and forecasting the weather patterns of money flowing through large capital markets. Chris will co-host the first 4 episodes of the podcast, where we're going to be discussing that life is lucky, things about energy transfer, the chemistry of life, and thermodynamics. And today we're talking about the idea that honey is life. And this is the same thing as saying energy is life. Welcome, Chris. It's great to have you here on Modeling the Secrets of the Bees.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about the topic called Honey is Life. And as I mentioned, this idea is about the concept that energy is life. Energy is converted into life. And for bees, their energy source is honey. And for human beings, our energy source is money. And I'll be explaining the idea that honey is money on this podcast episode. First, I'd like to talk through with you the ideas about energy transfer, some of the ideas we discussed in the first podcast episode and the second podcast episode, energy and energy transfer and work. And really, what I'd like to do is go through some definitions about the word energy and energy transfer. And I would like to just sort of read you my understanding of the definitions of a few words, and then have you just describe from your perspective, maybe either a simpler way to say it or a different philosophical approach to these words. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay. So the first definition is the word energy, which in this context means the capacity of a physical system to perform work. Do you have a better explanation of that?
Not really. I like that definition, but maybe I could just sort of walk through how I sort of conceptualize it. Because the thing about energy is that it can neither be created nor destroyed, but it can be transferred. So when I talk to people and I'm trying to explain about energy in physics terms, I would always think about money. And what you can think about is when we think about energy, there are things called potential energy, and then there's a type of energy called kinetic energy. The way I would describe things would be the kinetic energy is like having cash. It's like having money in your wallet. And then you could take that money and you could put it into various different bank accounts. And so those bank accounts would represent potential energy. And so you'd have gravitational potential energy, you might have nuclear potential energy, you might have chemical potential energy, and you could diversify your energy. And if you needed to, you could go to the bank, make a withdrawal, and convert that potential energy back into kinetic energy. And that process would involve work. So it's that transfer, the capacity to do work is related to the conversion of energy from one form to another.
I think that's a really great explanation. And I will jump ahead a few podcast episodes to explain the idea that in a business, the potential energy is the potential money on a sales funnel, which is the money that's in the market. And as soon as a service or product is provided and real money is exchanged, or kinetic money in motion, money that's part of the motion of the money. It's moved from the potential market. So there's money in a customer's bank account, and then a service is performed, and that money is transferred from their bank account into a business bank account through a series of processes. And it's converted from this sales funnel to the income statement. And the last step on the income statement is profit. And it's going through a series of steps to get to the end. So I understand what you're saying and appreciate your definition. And we'll get to that later in the Lessons from Nature podcast modeling the secrets of the bees.
There's one other bit that I would always talk about, which has to do with the transaction fees. It sort of gets into second law of thermodynamics, which whenever you're transferring, if it's not what we call in physics perfectly elastic, you're going to create heat.
Yeah.
And that heat is friction. So friction creates heat, and that's akin or analogous to the transaction fees.
So you're saying that when a credit card is used, and let's say the transaction fee might be like 2.4% of the value. So if a $100 thing is charged on a credit card, the merchant pays 2.4% of that to the credit card company. You're saying that's like friction.
That's right.
Interesting.
So
actually, that comes in a later podcast episode too, but I appreciate getting there early. It's great. The next thing is energy transfer, which is you touched upon, and I'm just going to read the definition, which is the process of energy being passed from one object or system to another. And you described that, and I described it too in the business sense, is a process of moving this energy from over here to over here. And I'm just going to go to the next one, which is work. And the definition of work is the energy transferred to or from an object by means of a force or heat acting on the object, causing displacement in the direction of the force or temperature gradient. Now, that is a lot of words, okay?
Right.
So maybe you could define work in a way that is more sort of at the level of bees and people and money.
So imagine I've got a pencil here.
Yeah.
And if I lift the pencil, what's happening is I'm applying a force upward against the force of gravity, and I'm creating gravitational potential energy. So there's kinetic energy that I'm applying. So I've got a force that I'm working against. Kinetic energy is movement. I'm moving it up the pencil. Now I've got gravitational potential energy, and I can convert that back to kinetic energy just by doing that.
Yeah.
And so what you're seeing there is that the work in order to bank energy as into that gravitational potential energy bank account can be converted back into kinetic energy fairly easily. And that's how I really describe the process, rather than getting into dot products of forces and displacement vectors and so on that involves calculus and trigonometry. Well, just as an intuitive way to describe to my mother how it works, so to speak.
And I add one more thing, is that when that hit your table, I heard it, which means that the energy from the potential energy was converted into kinetic energy, and also vibration and heat and sound. And
that sound is the friction.
Yeah. That's the credit card fee. Okay. The transaction fee of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So great. So that's a good one. And now let's get into the type of energy transfer that is related to this podcast, which starts with fusion. I'm just going to read a bunch of stuff, and I'll give you a chance to pause and say, like, is that the right sort of definition of it? Is fusion is atomic work. Is that right?
I would call it nuclear work. I'm splitting hairs, but atoms have electrons going around them, but in the fusion, it's so hot that those electrons just become free, and it's actually nuclear. So it's when two protons get together, or an alpha particle and some protons get together and create heavier nuclei.
Well, wouldn't splitting hairs be closer to fission, and combining hairs be closer to fusion?
Yeah.
You know who you're dealing with here, Chris. You're figuring it out now. Okay.
Okay. You must be a dad.
Yes. Hashtag dad jokes all day. Okay. Next, we have light radiation, which is electromagnetic work.
Yeah. Well, again, it's work once it gets converted.
Right. Right. Okay. Got it.
So there's electromagnetic energy that's coming from the sun, and that's 8 minutes at the speed of light, roughly. It's not actually losing any energy until it gets absorbed by, let's just say, a plant leaf and converted into sugars through photosynthesis.
Good. Well, you got to the next one, and that's called. So we have organic chemistry comes next. So this light radiation comes to Earth. And through organic chemistry, then that's organic chemistry work, which is doing a conversion. So the transfer, electromagnetic transfer, is just moving it from one place to another. But the work is when it strikes something. Okay, something has to happen, and the
it's
thing
converted.
It's converted. That's conversion. Okay. So
Yeah.
so at first it's converted by chemistry into sugar, and converted by chemistry and through plants into sugar. And then the next process is a bee biological process where bees do bee work to gather this solidified sunlight in the form of sugar. And then if a human being then gathers the sugar in the form of honey, which has been processed internally by the bees, and then so a human could do work and like physically like use energy, calories to like go get honey and collect it. That's human work. Mm-hmm. And then if a business system organized the collection, distribution, sale of that honey, then the human can convert that honey into money. And the
That's right.
And the money is a representation of moving sunlight around through this process. Does that sound right so far?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why businesses hire workers.
That's right.
To
and the
do
workers
the work
are powered by sunlight.
As you described, exactly.
And if someone extracts oil from the ground and sells that oil, it's the same thing because the energy in that oil was in the sun and they're doing human work to get it. It was a plant work, human work, money. And if you grow food, plant work, human work, money. Mm-hmm. And this is part of the invisible game that we're playing. And so what we're going to talk about next, so thank you for the definitions. We're going to go into the idea here that the bee business of making honey is identical to the human business of making money. And I explain these ideas in Honey is Money, The Secrets of the Bees, which this podcast is based on. And what this means is that humans are zoomorphic to honeybees, which is that humans and bees have the same behavior in terms of energy collection and storage, because both humans and bees gather energy using the same processes, and the energy we're gathering is powered by sunlight. So our processes are the same. And what I want to do now is go through the representation of relating honey is life to money is life from the perspective of all various business components. And I know, Chris, given your background, both in terms of modeling large scale, transactions and markets, and also running a business within your company. So what I'm looking for here is I'm going to explain the things that exist in quote unquote nature, mm-hmm. and then also in business, and look for feedback from you of what do you think about these ideas, and also relate them to things you're working on and things that you've seen and experienced. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay. So in the bee world, the customers are the flowers, and mm-hmm. the flowers have the energy in them through this biological process. And the energy is nectar, which is sugar and water combined in a certain percentage. And that's produced in flowers. What happens from that is that the flowers do marketing. And the marketing that the flowers do where I live is only 60 days per year. Did you know that flowers do marketing? Have you ever thought of that? That flowers are doing marketing?
Oh, totally. Some of the ways they do marketing is in the ultraviolet or through the shapes that they might have. And I've always thought that the flower is the marketing arm of the plant.
That's right.
To try to attract, in this case, the workers, the bees, to come and do an exchange of nectar. That's a payment, I guess. Yeah. For some work to be done, which would be to move some pollen around, and that becomes a virtuous cycle. And the other thing that I've noticed over the years is that plants will market at different times. All of the flowers, they don't all happen at once, and we're seeing that here as certain trees or certain plants will flower early in the spring. Some others will flower a little bit later. I guess that's to deal with competition. So yeah, I definitely like that analogy.
Well, I wouldn't say it's an analogy. It's a literal analogy. And an example is, you ever do any pay-per-click optimization? You ever notice that when there are certain ads that have certain colors and certain font sizes, mm-hmm. and some are more attractive than others? And what happens? There's a whole zillions of people and AIs that optimize those things and in their fight for attention, human attention. So the flowers are doing the same thing, and the bees are having the same behaviors based on what you just said, the colors, and also the sense, the smell of sugar in the flowers. And the bees are communicating those things to each other, which I talk about later on the Honey Talks chapter. Based on, they're letting the other bees know where the flowers are that have the most energy, but right now, today, based on the position of the sun. And they send, more bees in that direction. And they know very specifically where the flowers are, how many of the flowers are, what color the flowers are, and so on. And we do that with advertising. So that's advertising component of marketing, and that's what they're doing. And like you said, after marketing comes sales. A flower is successful in the marketing when one or more bees moves their genetic information around to pollinate other flowers in the area, which spreads the success of this transaction in the market and creates reproduction. And that's the same thing as having like a Starbucks on every corner, okay? Because that's what's happening is it worked. And now you can spread out to gather more energy in the advantageous competitive landscape of the world. And what you said is exactly right. This is bee work. This is the work of the bees is pollinating the flowers. We need this process to happen to keep us alive. It's a super important process, pollinating the flowers. And as you said, the compensation is energy. That's what they're being paid in. In exchange for doing this work, the bee is paid. So what happens is the pollen sticks to the bee's body. And that's sort of a byproduct of the work. Or it's a component of the work is that the bees are moving the pollen, and the bees also consume pollen. The baby bees are created with this protein and fed this protein as well. But for the most part, bees are powered by the sugar, the carbohydrate. And so the pollen is moved around on the bees' bodies, and they're getting the sugar, which is the money, for doing the work. The next component after compensation is operations. And what happens next is, what do you imagine happens next when a bee goes to a flower? Let's do it this way. When a bee goes to a flower and they're not eating the sugar water, the nectar, they're storing it in a pouch inside their body. What do you think happens next?
Well, they have to go through a process of refinement to apply some work to really distill that pollen down into a more highly concentrated form that can be stored. They're probably doing things like making it so that it doesn't get disease or fungus or so on, and so that it can be stored for longer terms. But there's work that goes into that, which is a manufacturing process, really.
That's right. The honey factory is inside the beehive. And it's exactly right. And what's happening is the bees are taking the nectar from the flowers back to the hive. They store it in a pouch. It's not regurgitation, but they move it out of their bodies into a little cell. And the process is super simple. All they do is they're measuring the moisture content of this nectar. And what they do is they beat their little wings and they're evaporating the water. That's the process. That's work. That's called work. It costs energy. It costs honey to make honey, Chris. It costs honey.
The flapping of the wings is a form of kinetic energy that's powered by chemical energy that's inside the bee. And exactly. So yes, that is work.
And the reason they're doing this is if the moisture content of the nectar is too high, it'll ferment and become mead. And that doesn't last as long. Honey has a certain moisture content, and honey can last for thousands of years and still be edible because it's preserved. So what they're doing is they're preserving the energy. But in addition, you're going to love this, they can pack more in. They're concentrating the energy. The moisture content of honey is much lower than nectar from a flower. You can know that because it's more viscous. So imagine it's 50% less. I just made this up. So it takes up less volume. Okay.
Yep.
And that means since it costs work to create honeycomb out of wax, they're converting the sugar into wax in a different process in their body. So they eat the sugar and then they convert it into wax. If you can store more in, you need less structure, which means you do the least amount of work to store the most amount of light, which is in the book.
Right. So they can put the same amount of energy into a smaller warehouse.
Exactly. And since they're building the warehouse, maintaining the warehouse, and heating the warehouse in the winter by moving their wings, the inside of a beehive in the winter in Fahrenheit, where I live, could be 70, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and it could be 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And you hear them, and they're beating their wings, converting energy from the sun into mechanical work to heat the hive. And so they want the smallest volume to have the most capacity, which is having the smallest building to store the most amount of money or gold or employees or whatever, because you don't want to pay a gigantic heating bill.
Right. So it's a big optimization process that they're going through. And
that's what's happening.
Over hundreds of millions of years, they seem to have gotten it right.
Right. Well, we're doing it too. And I'm sure you work in an office building. I don't know. Do you have an office building with what you do?
Oh, those were the days.
There was an office building at one point. Was it 8 miles tall and 3 miles wide?
No.
Okay. Well,
it was 8 miles away, but no, it was pretty concentrated and might have been a vector for a lot of viruses that day.
Back in the day, right?
Yeah.
But the point is, it was the right size. At some point, you outgrew it. At some point, it was too big. At some point, it was too small. I mean, basically, in the beginning, it was 0, and then it was something, and then there was the next bird. Basically, and so scaling the warehouse and the office with the energy availability, we do, human beings, and bees do. And they're optimizing temperature, humidity, the same things.
That's right. And we would use a process of applying calculus and minimizing space and so on. And I guess the bees have an innate sense of all that through the evolutionary process. So
yeah, I think it's a survivor bias, because the ones that didn't make it.
Yeah, that's evolution in a nutshell, right?
That's
survivor bias.
Survivor bias. And we are also a product of this. And if you think about a human behavior in terms of money, the feeling of not having enough money is the same feeling as being afraid to run out of food. And the behaviors people have on the planet at scale, when there's a drought or a famine, follow this pattern, because there's not enough energy to survive, and money is what we trade. So it's best to create abundance if possible and spread the honey around in a more harmonious, regenerative way.
Yeah,
instead of concentrating it.
Then you don't have the kinetic energy of conflict.
That's right, because in chapter, I forget, 20 something, cooperating costs less than fighting. Okay. And the idea is that if nothing else, we can all agree that war is expensive and we're all on one planet. This is later, but anyway, but yes, you are right. It's more energy efficient to live harmoniously than not. Okay, it's that. And now I'm just going to give just a very two specific examples of energy and calories and money. So I'm going to use a big number because the math was easy. But if a person earns $1 million per year in US dollars, that's 3 cents of income per second. And if a person requires 2,000 calories per day to survive, that's 0.023 calories per second. And basically in this equation, it's 0.73 calories per dollar of income. That's the energy transfer of calories from the sun into money. And every business and every person that's earning money in any way that they're earning money is trading their calories, energy, in exchange for money and work in the middle. This is work. They're doing work, to get the money that's giving them the energy in the form of money coming back. It costs honey to make honey. And in the middle of this is money. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting way to look at things. Sometimes it's going to be the potential money, because putting your money into a bank account, you don't have to do kinetic energy of work. You get interest paid to you, if it's a fixed income asset or something like that. And other times it's actually doing kinetic energy, like going and building a fence for somebody and getting paid for that, or driving a truck and picking up some junk. And that would be very, very kinetic and active. So there's all kinds of different ways of converting energy into money.
I'm going to push back on one thing you said there about putting money in the bank and getting interest. What you're trading is risk. What you're trading is risk. And so risk has a value. And even if you put money in a bank at fixed income, and even if it's guaranteed, what if the bank gets annihilated? Okay. Or gets taken out by some thing that occurs outside the scope of a guarantee. Okay. And you lose all your money. And so what you're getting, you're not doing work in the sense of trading calories, but you're trading risk for the potential to get money back, I think. What do you think?
Yeah. There are concepts, though, in my world, things like the risk-free rate, which is, there is a spectrum of risk.
Yes.
And the high-risk stuff is like buying a share in a company, like a tech company. You get some benefit from that, like the ability to vote on who should be the CEO and so on. At the other end is something like a government bond or a cash in a FDIC guaranteed bank account where the risk is very, very low.
But not zero.
No, I would never say the risk is going to be zero, because you have defaults, you have inflation.
That's right.
And so on. But there is also something called passive investing or active investing. And certainly passive investing would be more put your money somewhere, forget about it, do your main thing, which might be not related to finance, whereas active investing might be sitting there with your trading account online and constantly trading back and forth, which requires a lot more energy.
And there's stability, cycles of stability, and cycles of chaos. And even when the bees put the honey in the hive, there are competitors for that honey. Other bees are competitors. I had mice in a beehive this winter because there weren't enough bees to defend it. And I didn't put on the entrance reducer to make a small opening so that it was defensible. These things, or a tree, or I had some animal lift all the lids off my beehive and killed a bunch of hives because I didn't put a big gigantic rock on it. So like the honey was safe until, and so they did all that bee work. The sun did the nuclear work. And then everything happened. And then an energy competitor came along that was smarter, stronger, faster. Even the wind is an energy competitor. The wind can knock over a beehive. Like anything can happen because the beehive is blocking the energy. If the energy of the wind is more than the coefficient of friction combined with the surface, whatever it is,
tornado comes and knocks everything over, then you've got a big
that's
problem.
Energy transfer. I mean, that's a transfer of energy that made that happen. And this, what I'm trying, it's a fun to go down the rabbit hole on this, but like everything's competing for solar energy. And if you put enough wind turbines in, maybe the kite boarders will be unhappy. Like in Acapulco or wherever we put enough solar panels and the plants don't grow. Like whatever it is. And the point of this is that honey is life, which means that energy is life and money is life. And we're playing this invisible game. And it would be smart to play the invisible game in a way over a longer period of time, considering all living things on the planet for future generations, so we can all live in harmony with the rest of nature.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Amen. Let's also keep in mind that we are a part of nature.
Yeah.
As human beings,
That's
we
right.
often seem to forget that. So we need to live in harmony because we are actually part of that. So it's definitely our self-interest. And I think the term that you use there is key. That's just the long-term thinking rather than the short-term, just get me ahead for the immediate gratification, as opposed to thinking about the long-term impact of our kids, our species, health of our planet, all of that stuff. So definitely agree with you on that point.
Thanks, Chris, for spending time with me on this episode of Modeling the Secrets of the Bees. I'll see you next time on Secret 4, which is called Time is Honey.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure, Mark, and I'm looking forward to the next podcast.